Jim Carrey, the immortal icon of Hollywood, the wild and untamed Ace Ventura, the green whirlwind of The Mask, the fragile dreamer trapped inside the Truman Show, and the shattered soul behind eternal sunshine of the Spotless Mind. He was born not in luxury, but in struggle, the son of a broken musician and a sick mother who survived on painkillers and hope. From scrubbing toilets and sleeping in a van to becoming the first actor in history paid $20 million for a single film, Jim Carrey carved his name into the very soul of cinema, turning suffering into light, loneliness into laughter, and madness into art. But behind the thunder of applause lies a darkness few could endure, the loss of both parents before he could share his triumph, the years of depression that devoured him from within, and a love that ended in death and scandal. Now, at 63, the storm is more devastating than ever. If Jim Carrey has ever made you laugh through your own pain, honor him with a like. A small tribute to a man who bled quietly so the world could smile. It's cruel how greatness is often born from pain. Every legend begins not with fame, but with a wound that refuses to heal. Jim Carrey carried that wound in silence, a boy who learned to smile not because life was kind, but because it was unbearable. He entered this world on January 17, 1962, in the cold, grey town of Newmarket, Ontario, Canada. The youngest of 4 children, John, Patricia, Rita, and Jim, he was born into a house that had laughter but little warmth, love but no money. His father, Percy Carrey, once filled dance halls with his saxophone until bills replaced melodies. His mother, Kathleen, a failed singer with a fragile heart, drowned her pain in medication and prayers. "My brain is deteriorating at an incredible rate," she would whisper, half in fear, half in resignation. To a 7-year-old boy, those words were not exaggerations. They were prophecies. At the dinner table, she spoke often about dying. And so Jim became her laughter, her healer, her last fragile hope. "If I could make her laugh," he said years later, "maybe she'd stay." That was how it began. The clown born not from joy, but from terror. He performed for an audience of one, a mother who might not wake up tomorrow. And when she laughed, even through pain, it felt like saving a life. By age 11, he had already begun chasing the impossible dream. He mailed 80 photographs of his funniest faces to the Carol Burnett Show, hoping for a letter, a miracle, anything. But no reply ever came. The silence was devastating. For a boy who lived to make people laugh, being ignored felt worse than being forgotten. Then came 1974, the year everything collapsed. Percy lost his job, and with it, the family's fragile safety. They were forced to live in a Volkswagen van parked behind a tire factory in Scarborough. At 12, Jim scrubbed toilets and mopped floors to help buy food. His hands were cracked and red from cold water and detergent. "I was angry," he later said. "My father was hurting, and I blamed the world." The nights in that van were colder than the snow outside. He fell asleep to the sound of his father's cough and the low hum of factory lights bleeding through thin walls. The smell of gasoline mixed with the ache of hunger. Sometimes he would wake in the dark and see his father sitting in the driver's seat, saxophone resting on his lap, too tired to play, too proud to cry. "My dad was the guy who could walk into a room and have everyone wrapped around his finger," Jim once recalled. "He was my hero." And yet, Jim watched that hero crumble in silence. At 15, Percy took his son to the Yuck Yucks Comedy Club in Toronto. Maybe laughter, once again, could save them. Jim walked on stage with hope, burning through fear, and walked off with humiliation. The audience booed him before he finished his first line. "It was like dying," he admitted. That night, he didn't try to make his mother laugh. He simply sat in the van, staring at the frost forming on the window, wondering if his dream had frozen too. But pain, like comedy, has rhythm. And somewhere between despair and duty, Jim found his timing. At 16, he dropped out of Aldershot High School and went to work in a steel mill in Hamilton. His father wept when he quit, but still drove him to every small club that would have him. "My dad taught me," Jim said later, "that you can fail at what you don't want, so you might as well take a chance on what you love." There were nights when hunger and silence fought louder than laughter. Yet inside that darkness, something unbreakable was forming, a resilience that no rejection could erase. That night, the boy who had nothing stood before the mirror once more. His face was swollen from tears. His hands still smelled of steel and soap. He forced a smile, not for joy, but for defiance. And in that tiny reflection, a legend was born. For some, laughter is a job. For Jim Carrey, it was survival. Proof that even in the darkest places, humor can keep the soul alive. What does a dream cost when you've already lost everything once? For Jim Carrey, the price was hunger, humiliation, and the cold silence of a city that didn't care if he existed. He left home in 1979 with less than $100, a second-hand suitcase, and a heart full of impossible dreams. His father's old silver car coughed its way down the frozen highway as snow fell behind him like ash. In the passenger seat sat a small photograph of his parents, his mother's smile already fading, his father's eyes tired but proud. The road stretched endlessly south, from the icy suburbs of Toronto to the uncertain light of Los Angeles. Every mile was a gamble between hope and hunger. Every gas stop a prayer that the engine would last one more day. When the city finally appeared on the horizon, it looked like heaven made of glass, dazzling, fragile, and ready to break. When he arrived in Los Angeles at 18, the world seemed made of light. Neon signs flickered like promises, and every billboard told him that fame lived just beyond reach. But beneath the California sun, Jim found a different kind of cold. Not the frost of Canada, but the chill of indifference. He rented a single room above a noisy bar, where the laughter downstairs reminded him of what he'd once had and what he was still chasing. His hands, still rough from years of factory work, trembled as he counted coins for cheap diner meals. Sometimes he would rehearse lines to the reflection in his coffee cup, whispering, "One day, they'll hear me." He sent headshots to every casting office he could find, walked from studio to studio under the merciless heat, and waited for callbacks that never came. One night, after yet another rejection, he slept in his car on a side street off Sunset Boulevard, watching the city lights blur into tears. "Hollywood had sunshine," he would later say, "but not for me." In those years, he performed anywhere that would have him. Half-empty bars, forgotten clubs, talent nights that paid in drink tickets. He learned how to make strangers laugh, even when his own heart was breaking. The stage lights became his only warmth, their glow masking the loneliness that followed him home. Every night, he dialed home to Canada, pretending to sound cheerful for his parents. His mother, Kathleen, was fading fast, confined to her bed, her voice softer each week. "They laughed tonight, Mom," he would tell her. "You'd be proud." Sometimes he imagined she could feel the applause through the phone line. He never said how he cried afterward, not from failure, but from fear that she would never see what he was becoming. As her health worsened, he returned to the stage with a different kind of desperation. It wasn't about fame anymore. It was about redemption, a race against time to make her smile one last time. The call came in 1991. His mother was gone. There was no grand farewell, no time to tell her that he had finally been noticed, that he was about to film his first real roles. That night, Jim walked aimlessly through Los Angeles, the same city that had mocked him, now echoing with her absence. The laughter he once used to save her now felt hollow. When she died, he later confessed, it felt like the laughter died too. He sat in his car until sunrise, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror, the same mirror that had once been his only friend. Behind the eyes of the comedian, he saw a boy who had tried to heal the world with jokes, but couldn't save the one person who mattered most. Then, just weeks later, the phone rang again. This time not with grief, but a chance. A producer from Fox had seen one of Jim's late-night performances and invited him to audition for a sketch show called In Living Color. He almost didn't go. The wound was too fresh, his heart too heavy for comedy. But somewhere in that silence, he heard her voice again. Go make them smile, Jimmy. So he went. He stood beneath the studio lights, trembling, and let every ounce of pain pour out through his characters. The room erupted with laughter, then applause. It was the break he had waited for his entire life, and she wasn't there to see it. The world was about to discover Jim Carrey, only days after the woman who discovered him first was gone. Weeks later, he stepped back onto a small stage. The room smelled of beer and burnt cigarettes, but it felt sacred. Before his first line, he whispered to the microphone, "This one's for you, Mom." The crowd laughed, then roared, not knowing that every joke was a prayer. That night, something changed. He didn't perform for approval anymore. He performed to remember. The pain didn't disappear, but it found purpose. The boy who once scraped frost from a van window now stood beneath a spotlight that felt like sunlight. And for the first time, it didn't burn. It healed. From that moment, every smile he brought into the world carried a fragment of hers. And Jim Carrey, the dreamer, the drifter, the son who lost everything, learned that laughter was never about escape. It was about survival and the grace of turning heartbreak into hope. Sometimes, a dream doesn't come true. It detonates. When it does, the explosion is blinding, glorious, and almost always fatal to the dreamer. For Jim Carrey, that explosion began in 1992. Just months after his mother's death, a single spark, in living color, ignited the fire that would light up the world. The same boy who once talked to his reflection in a mirror, alone in a cold Canadian room, now found himself reflected on millions of television screens across America. At just 30, the laughter he once used to save his mother became the sound that saved him. But the thing about light, it burns. Then came 1994, the year the world erupted in laughter. Within 12 months, Jim Carrey transformed from a struggling stand-up into a global phenomenon. Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber, 3 back-to-back cultural quakes that shook Hollywood to its core. Ace Ventura, shot for just $15 million, grossed over $107 million. The Mask soared to $351 million. Dumb and Dumber piled on another $247 million. In a single year, one man's face generated over $700 million worldwide. He was 32, rich, adored, unstoppable. But that same year, the laughter that filled every theater in the world fell silent in one small hospital room in Canada. His father, Percy Carey, the gentle dreamer who once handed him a saxophone and whispered, "Follow joy," not safety, was taking his final breath. The applause from Los Angeles could not reach that bedside. Jim, now a star adored across continents, found himself boarding a plane not for a premiere, but for a farewell. The flashbulbs of Hollywood gave way to the dim light of a modest chapel, where the man who had once played jazz to feed his family now lay still, his hands folded like a musician between songs. At the service, Jim sat in silence, surrounded by faces blurred by grief, clutching a single folded paper he had carried for years. It was the check he had written to himself when he was still unknown, $10 million for acting services rendered, a promise to his father that someday the dream would pay off. He slipped it gently into his father's coat pocket, his voice breaking as he whispered, "We did it, Dad." It was not a gift of wealth, but a confession of love too late to spend. The world would soon hail him as the first actor in history to earn $20 million for a single role. But the only man he had ever wanted to celebrate with was gone. A miracle fulfilled, yet unbearable to bear. As the headlines screamed his success, Jim stood at his father's grave under a gray Ontario sky, wondering why life had waited until death to keep its promise. He had conquered the world, but lost the one person who believed he could. The laughter that once carried him now echoed like a ghost, and every standing ovation that followed felt, to him, like a prayer unanswered. And the miracle, like all miracles, came with a curse. The cable. Guy was darker than anyone expected, and Hollywood turned on him. Critics called him unhinged. Fans called him greedy. The film made $102 million on a $47 million budget, enough to survive, but not to silence the crowd. "Hollywood had paid for laughter," he said later, "but I gave them truth, and they didn't want it." The fame that once fed him now drained him. On Liar Liar, 1997, he worked 16-hour days, refusing stunt doubles. "I wanted it to hurt," he said, "because truth hurts, and comedy should too." His body bruised, his spirit frayed, his smile became a kind of armor. When the cameras stopped, he often stayed behind, staring into the makeup mirror long after everyone had left. Once, he saw himself reflected under the harsh white lights, not the wild-eyed comedian the world adored, but the tired man beneath. "Who are you when they stop laughing?" he whispered to his reflection. Then, as if destiny wasn't finished with him, The Truman Show arrived in 1998, a mirror within a mirror. The story of a man who discovers his entire life is a lie. For audiences, it was a masterpiece. For Jim, it was a confession. The movie grossed $264 million and won him a Golden Globe, but it also cracked something open inside him. "I felt like Truman," he said later. "Everyone was watching, and I couldn't find the exit." In 1999, he went further into the abyss with Man on the Moon, playing Andy Kaufman, the man who could never stop performing, even off stage. Jim became Andy completely. The crew addressed him by the character's name. For 4 months, Jim Carrey didn't exist, he confessed. The film earned him another Golden Globe and cost him another piece of his soul. By the end of the decade, Jim Carrey was more than a man. He was a symbol, a mirror for everyone who ever dreamed too hard. He had risen from poverty to a $20 million paycheck, from sleeping in a van to owning the world's laughter. But he had lost both parents before either could see what he'd become. He had conquered the stage, yet struggled to recognize the face behind the mask. On quiet nights, when the studio lights dimmed and the cameras went dark, he would linger in the glow of the empty set, staring at the reflection of his own silhouette fading into shadow. It was in those moments he understood. Greatness isn't about perfection. It's about endurance. Fame gave him light, but it was pain that made him shine. And in that lonely golden silence after the laughter died, Jim Carrey, the boy who once spoke to a mirror to feel less alone, finally stood before one again. Only this time, the man looking back had survived. It is cruel when love arrives like sunlight, only to vanish like a storm. It was 1986, and Los Angeles pulsed with restless dreams when Jim Carrey met Melissa Woomer, a waitress with weary eyes and a laugh that could melt the chill of a comedy club at midnight. She watched him perform under the harsh spotlight of the Comedy Store, where applause was rare and hope was cheaper than coffee. He was a struggling comic with holes in his shoes. She was a survivor of long shifts and longer nights. Together, they built something fragile but pure. Two souls clinging to laughter as if it could feed them. "Someday," Jim told her one night, as neon lights flickered through the diner window, "I'll make you proud." When they married in 1987, it wasn't glamour, but sincerity. No orchestra, no diamonds, only a promise and a borrowed tux. That same year, their daughter Jane was born. Under the humming lights of a small hospital, he held her tiny fingers and whispered, "You'll never know hunger like I did." The world outside was uncertain, but inside that dim room, there was warmth. 3 people, 1 dream, and the illusion that love could hold back the tide of the unknown. For a time, it did. Their little apartment smelled of baby powder and instant noodles, the air filled with the sound of Jane's laughter blending with Jim's late-night rehearsals. He wrote jokes by the refrigerator light, while Melissa counted tips, both believing that love could stretch farther than money. "We didn't have much," he would recall, "but we had everything that mattered." It was a home made of noise and heartbeats. Yet fate, in its quiet cruelty, began to test that fragile peace. In 1994, the miracle arrived. Ace Ventura, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber turned Jim into a global phenomenon. The man who once performed for $25 a night was now commanding $20 million per film. Success came like an earthquake, loud, dazzling, unstoppable, and it cracked the foundation beneath them. He was everywhere, Melissa said years later, but not at home. Every call from a studio pulled him farther away. Every red carpet took him one step beyond their reach. Fame is a light that blinds as much as it shines. The brighter it grew, the darker their kitchen table became. By 1995, the silence had grown louder than the laughter. There was no betrayal, no cruelty, just exhaustion, distance, and the slow unraveling of 2 people who still cared but no longer understood how. "It's hard to come home after living inside so many lives," Jim would admit years later. He came home one night after another shoot and found Melissa asleep on the couch, their daughter curled beside her, the TV flickering softly. For a moment, he almost stayed. But the car outside was waiting, and so was the world. He closed the door quietly, not realizing it would be the last time that home would sound like home. When they finally divorced, it wasn't a scandal, but a surrender. 8 years of marriage, reduced to signatures and silence. The courtroom became their final stage. Love reduced to numbers on paper. $10,000 a month for child support, and a promise to try and remain kind. "He's not a bad man," Melissa told the court. "He just forgot to come home." Jim tried to bridge the distance. "I called her every week," he said, "but sometimes that wasn't enough." There were birthdays missed, plays unseen, moments lost to airports and scripts. Yet even in absence, love refused to die. It changed shape, becoming quieter, deeper, and harder to name. Jane grew up to sing, her voice soft and familiar, echoing the laughter her father once carried across the world. "Maybe that's how he says, 'I love you,'" she would later tell a reporter. Years passed, and fame cooled into reflection. Sometimes, Jim would open an old box of memories, her baby rattle, a faded wedding photo, and feel both gratitude and ache. "Some loves don't last forever," he said once. "They just build you into the person who can." And when he saw his daughter smile, it was as if the sunlight that once vanished had quietly returned, no longer blinding but warm enough to forgive the storm. But it seems cruel fate never allowed him to hold happiness for long. Each time light appeared, shadows rushed in to steal it away. Yet for a moment, it truly looked as though destiny had bent in his favor. In 1994, on the set of Dumb and Dumber, Jim Carrey met Lauren Holly, a woman whose laughter didn't sound like Hollywood. It was unforced, uncalculated, pure. Their connection was effortless, their chemistry instant, though whispers in the tabloids claimed it had begun too soon, before his first marriage had truly ended. Both denied it. "We were just two people trying to make each other laugh," Lauren later said. But laughter, for Jim, was never simple. It was both armor and invitation. In her calm presence, he found a stillness he hadn't known in years, a warmth untouched by ambition. She didn't see the celebrity. She saw the man still learning how to breathe after success. For Jim, it felt like the universe was finally giving him permission to rest, to love, and to start over. For once, the noise of fame faded into something that sounded like peace. They spent the next 2 years quietly building a world that felt almost normal, something neither of them had known in years. They drove along the Pacific Coast Highway with the top down, chasing sunsets instead of scripts, stopping at small diners where nobody cared who he was. "She was my calm," Jim would recall. "When the lights went off, she was still there." That calm would soon be tested. In September 1996, they married in a small private ceremony overlooking the cliffs of Malibu. No paparazzi, no publicists, only the ocean's applause and a few friends who understood how fragile their happiness was. Lauren looked radiant in ivory lace, Jim in a simple black suit. "It was beautiful," she later said. "Simple and real." But in Hollywood, simplicity doesn't last. Within days, the secret was gone. Cameras crowded their gates. Tabloids turned love into a headline. "We couldn't even have dinner without flashbulbs exploding through the windows," Lauren recalled. "It felt like living in a snowstorm made of cameras." What had begun in laughter was now buried under the noise. Fame, once Jim's dream, had become the cage that held them both. He was filming back-to-back hits: The Cable Guy, Liar Liar, The Truman Show, his face everywhere, his energy consumed by the demand to stay funny, stay brilliant, stay marketable. The man who once dreamed of applause was now drowning in it. Lauren, who longed for quiet and stability, found herself shrinking inside the chaos. "I felt like a hostage," she admitted years later. "Everywhere we went, someone was watching." Their home, once a sanctuary, became another set. Lights flashing, voices shouting, no room to breathe. One night, after yet another argument about the press, she turned off the lights and whispered, "Can we just be ordinary for one day?" He didn't answer. He didn't know how. Years later, Jim would look back and confess, "I thought I could balance it all. The lights, the love, the noise. But fame doesn't compromise. It consumes." The silence between them grew heavier than the applause outside their window, until even love couldn't fill it. By 1997, less than a year after their wedding, their world fell quiet again, this time for good. They filed for divorce after 10 months of marriage. No scandal, no shouting, just exhaustion. "We didn't stop loving each other," Lauren said softly. "We just couldn't survive the noise." When asked about it later, Jim didn't deny the ache. "It wasn't her," he said. "It was everything else." Lauren kept the wedding ring, not as regret, but as remembrance. "He's a good man," she once told a friend. But sometimes even good men get lost in their own light. Years later, when asked if he regretted their short-lived marriage, Jim smiled faintly. "No," he said. "Some people come into your life to remind you of peace, even if they can't stay." Long after the tabloids forgot, one photograph remained. Two people laughing on set before fame learned their faces. And for Jim Carrey, that image would forever remind him that even in the loudest world, love's quiet moments are the ones that never fade. It's strange how love keeps finding him, sometimes in laughter, sometimes in silence. Yet for Jim Carrey, every beginning seemed to bloom from the ashes of what came before. 3 years after his brief marriage to Lauren Holly ended in 1997, when the noise of tabloids had finally faded and the spotlight dimmed, he met Renee Zellweger on the set of Me, Myself, and Irene in 1999. She was not the Hollywood type, unguarded, genuine, her smile carrying a warmth that felt almost impossible in a world built on illusion. Jim, weary from fame's glare, saw in her a quiet refuge. "She's the one. I'll only do it with her," he told the casting team, his voice half a dare, half a confession. On their first meeting, her dog broke free and leapt into his lap, leaving a wet stain on his pants. She panicked. He laughed until tears ran down his face. "I thought it was fate," she said later. Between takes, they'd share sandwiches on the grass, talk about everything except Hollywood, and drive through the night just to see how far the road would take them. For a man who'd lived through storms, Renee was sunlight after rain. "She's real," Jim once said softly, and I absolutely loved that. By the next year, that love deepened into something steadier, calmer. In 2000, they quietly became engaged, away from flashing lights and loud congratulations. "We didn't need to tell the world," Renee would later recall. "We just needed to be in it." For a time, they were, until the demands of success began to pull him away again. Jim was filming The Grinch and The Majestic, running from set to set, chasing perfection while she longed for peace. Fame had once been his dream, but now it felt like a thief that came for everything he loved. "We were in love," she admitted, "but the world wouldn't let us be simple." In 2001, their engagement ended as quietly as it began. No scandal, no anger, just two tired souls saying goodbye. Jim later said, "Renee was special. We just met at the wrong time." He kept the ring for years, tucked away in a drawer, a small monument to the idea that sometimes love's truest form is the one that slips away before it can break. 4 years later, in 2005, when the world thought he had given up on love entirely, it found him again, this time wrapped in laughter. Jenny McCarthy, the unfiltered, fiercely loyal comedian, met Jim at a charity event and instantly disarmed him. "He made me laugh every day," she said later. By 2006, they were inseparable. They didn't marry, neither needed ceremony to prove devotion. "We don't need a paper to prove love," Jenny declared, smiling. Their affection was spontaneous, joyful. On Valentine's Day, Jim hired a plane to trace the words "Jay loves Jay" across the blue Los Angeles sky. She looked up, tears shining like glass in the sunlight. He smiled, suddenly young again. The boy who still believed love could rewrite the sky. She cried. He grinned, boyish again for a moment. Together they built a quiet domestic world, sharing her young son, Evan, who had autism. Jim became gentle, patient, a steady hand in their small household. "He's the kindest man I've ever known," Jenny told People magazine. For Jim, who had lost so much, their home became something sacred. "That little boy," he once said, "taught me more about love than fame ever could." But even the brightest warmth can fade under the weight of life's storms. As years passed, his familiar shadow, depression, returned, silent but consuming. The laughter between them softened into small talk. The distance grew invisible but vast. By 2010, after 5 years together, they quietly parted ways. "I'm grateful to Jim for the years we shared," Jenny wrote. "He'll always have a place in my heart." Jim's response was simple. "I wish her nothing but the best." Yet even in kindness, sorrow lingered. When Jenny later revealed that her son still missed him, Jim answered gently, "I'll always do what's best for Evan." It was love transformed into care from afar. No bitterness, only memory. For a time it seemed he had finally learned to love without breaking. But destiny, ever cruel, had not finished its work. Somewhere in the near future, another love was waiting. One that would lift him higher than ever before, only to leave him with a silence deeper than any he had ever known. And as if fate wanted to test the limits of how much one heart could bear, another blow struck before Jim Carrey could even begin to heal. In 2012, she entered his life like sunlight after a decade of shadow. Catriona White, a young Irish makeup artist with eyes that carried both wonder and sadness. She was 23 years younger, quiet, gentle, and drawn to the side of him that the world rarely saw, the man behind the masks. Friends would later recall how Jim laughed again when she was near, how her presence softened the sharp edges of his loneliness. She called him "my dewdrop," and he told her she made him feel human again. For the first time in years, he wasn't the man who made the world laugh. He was simply a man in love. They spent evenings painting together, meditating, and reading poetry by Yeats. Words about love and loss that felt like prophecies. For a while, he looked alive again. "She was a delicate flower in a field of concrete," he once said softly, "and for a moment, I believed love could heal." But behind that light, the shadows waited. Their love was tender but fragile, shaped by two hearts that had both known pain too deeply. They broke up in 2013, reconciled in 2015, and tried once more to build a future that perhaps neither was strong enough to hold. Catriona battled waves of depression, and Jim, once the healer of everyone's sorrow, couldn't save her from her own. "When someone you love hurts," he told a friend, "you wish your laughter could be medicine. But sometimes it isn't enough." Then came September 2015. Her messages grew brief, then stopped altogether. The house felt too quiet, the air too still. Late one night, while Jim was sketching in his studio, the phone rang. The sound sliced through the silence like a blade. On the other end, a trembling voice spoke the words, "No heart is built to hear." His paintbrush slipped from his hand, blue paint spilling across the floor, the same color as her eyes. In that moment, the world fell silent. Later, the police report would describe her Los Angeles apartment as calm and untouched. The light still on, a cup of tea cooling beside the bed, a folded note on the nightstand signed, "Love always, Dewdrop." The officers called it an accidental overdose. Jim called it the day the music stopped. He flew to Ireland for her funeral, numb and wordless, staring out the plane window as clouds blurred beneath him like ghosts. When he stepped onto Irish soil, rain was already falling, the soft, endless kind that feels like sorrow made visible. The small church in Tipperary was crowded with faces he didn't know, eyes full of the grief he couldn't speak. Dressed in black, Jim carried her white coffin through the rain, not as a celebrity, but as a man undone. Cameras captured the moment his hand rested on the coffin lid, eyes closed, face carved with disbelief. The rain drummed gently on the wood, as if the sky itself refused to let her go. When the priest finished, Jim whispered, "You were too beautiful for this world." And as the coffin was lowered, a burst of wind swept through the hilltop graveyard, bending the trees as though the world exhaled with him. That night, alone in his hotel room, he stared at the rain-streaked window and posted one line to the world: "Love cannot be lost." But the storm did not end there. In 2016, as grief still gnawed at him, Catriona's family sued him, accusing him of things he did not do. The headlines were merciless, turning heartbreak into spectacle, grief into accusation. Jim, who had already buried love, now found himself buried beneath public judgment. He walked the courthouse halls surrounded by flashing cameras, his face expressionless, his eyes hollow. Reporters shouted questions that felt like knives. "They wanted a villain," he would later reflect, "but I was just a man in pain." Through it all, he refused to speak ill of her. When the court finally cleared his name in 2018, there was no triumph, only the quiet collapse of a man who had already lost too much. "Winning doesn't bring anyone back," he told a close friend. "It only proves the world can be cruel in new ways." He withdrew from Hollywood's noise, from red carpets and spotlights, and disappeared into solitude. Friends said he spent his days painting, his hands stained not with grief, but with color. "Color became my prayer," he confessed. His paintings turned raw and haunting, faces half-lit, eyes haunted, every canvas whispering her name in silence. And when the world finally grew quiet, he found himself alone, with nothing but the echo of her absence. The fame, the laughter, the flashing lights. None of it could drown out the sound of what was gone. Some nights, he would paint until dawn, letting color do what words no longer could. Blue, for the eyes he would never see again. Gray, for the silence that replaced her voice. Gold, for the small piece of light she left behind. The walls of his studio became a cathedral of memory, a place where grief was not hidden, but transformed. He never spoke her name in interviews again, but those close to him said he still kept a photograph of her tucked inside an old sketchbook. When asked once what he had learned from pain, he paused for a long time before answering, "That love doesn't die. It just changes its shape." And in that sentence lived the truth of his heart. He had not lost her, not really. She had simply become part of everything he created, every color he mixed, every quiet breath between brushstrokes. Years later, when a journalist asked if he had forgiven the world for what it took from him, he smiled, not bitterly, but gently. "The world doesn't owe me peace," he said. "I just owe it compassion." It was the kind of answer only a man who had walked through fire could give, the voice of someone who had made peace with the ashes. And so the curtain fell on that chapter of Jim Carrey's life, not with applause, but with silence. Somewhere in the stillness, beneath the hum of the city, the rain, and the memory of a girl named Catriona White, a man who once made the world laugh, had finally learned how to grieve, and how to keep loving, quietly, in the dark. After the storm, the world around him seemed hollow, like a stage after the final act. the laughter still echoing, but the audience gone. Yet, in 2018, as if life wanted to remind him that even the heaviest curtain never truly stays closed, a new light appeared. Her name was Ginger Gonzaga, a radiant, sharp-witted actress whose warmth cut through the silence he had built like armor. They met on the set of Kidding, a show that blurred the line between laughter and sorrow. Much like his own life. On screen, she played his partner. Off-screen, she became something gentler, more human. A soft presence that reminded him that peace could exist even after devastation. She didn't chase the spotlight. She simply stood beside him, and for the first time in years, he let someone in. For the first time since the world had broken him, Jim Carrey was seen smiling. Not the crafted, practiced grin of a survivor, but a genuine, unguarded expression of joy. In January 2019, when he walked the Golden Globes carpet with Ginger's hand in his, cameras captured something almost sacred. There he was, the man who had turned pain into laughter for decades, now simply laughing, freely, as though the weight of the past had momentarily lifted. The world called them an unlikely match, but to Jim, it was nothing short of grace. "She's incredible," he told one reporter, the words small but sincere. "I'm lucky." And he meant it. For a man who had lost nearly everything, lucky was a miracle. Their love was quiet, more a hum than a melody, more a breath than a symphony. They spent their days sketching, sharing old comedies, sipping coffee in unremarkable cafes, and finding comfort in the simplest things. Ginger understood the silences between his words. She didn't try to fill them. She simply sat beside them. "Jim has a light that flickers," she once said, "but it never goes out. You just have to be still enough to see it." For a time, she became his stillness. He told friends she had brought warmth back into his world, not as fire, but as sunlight filtering through closed blinds. "It's not passion," he joked once, "it's peace, and that's rarer." For a man who had lived through chaos, peace was the most intoxicating thing of all. But even soft light fades. By the end of 2019, their relationship came to an end, quietly, gently, without bitterness. There were no slammed doors, no accusations, no public spectacle, only two people who had loved each other enough to let go with grace. "She's wonderful," Jim said when asked. "She deserves all the light in the world." For once, the heartbreak didn't break him. It simply left him still. And perhaps that was the lesson, that not every love is meant to save you. Some are meant to remind you that you can still be whole. Since then, Jim has not sought love again. As of 2025, he lives a life stripped of performance. Painting in Brentwood, meditating in Maui, speaking rarely but meaningfully. "I've searched enough," he told a friend. "I've loved enough for one lifetime." There is no bitterness in his solitude, only understanding. Sometimes, in the early morning, he paints by the window as sunlight filters in, and he smiles faintly, as if remembering. The world calls it loneliness, he calls it peace. "I'm not searching for love anymore," he said in an interview. "I think I've become it." And perhaps he has. For in the end, Jim Carrey, the man who once made the world laugh while hiding his pain, found his final redemption not in applause, not in romance, but in stillness. Love, for him, no longer meant possession. It meant presence, the quiet, enduring kind that asks for nothing but breath. But how long does peace ever last? For Jim Carrey, life has always been a battlefield, and the war against his own body would prove no less brutal. Each morning, before the world wakes, he rises, not because he must, but but because rest now comes in fragments. The quiet hours before dawn have become his truest companions. His house shifts and sighs when he moves, the way old bones do when they remember every fall, every twist, every laugh paid for in pain. There are wounds no camera ever caught, the kind that hide beneath the skin, deep in the bones of a man who spent a lifetime making others forget their own hurt. On screen, he was unbreakable, elastic, electric, alive. But off-screen, his body began to tally the price of every laugh. During Liar Liar in 1997, a comic stunt went wrong. 3 ribs cracked mid-scene. The crew froze, but Jim waved them off, finished the take, and made a joke that drew nervous laughter. "I didn't want anyone to see I could break," he later admitted. Years later, in Yes Man, 2008, he jumped from a bridge himself. No double, no trick. He hit the water hard. His shoulder tore, his body shuddered, but he surfaced laughing. "I thought I could fly," he said later. "Turns out gravity still works. It always does. But some gravity pulls from deeper places." For more than 30 years, Jim Carrey has lived with depression. A quiet, relentless weight, pressing behind the smile that made the world love him. "You learn to smile through it," he said once, "but sometimes that smile is heavier than the pain." It came on slow, like fog that would not lift, until one day the light was gone. At the height of his fame, adored by millions, he felt the loneliest. Prozac dulled the ache but also dimmed the joy. "I didn't feel pain," he said, "but I didn't feel joy either." So he let the silence return and faced what it brought. "That's when I started painting," he explained. "I stopped performing. I started listening." The canvas became his mirror, the colors his therapy. Every brushstroke said what words could not, that he was still here, still healing. By 60, the body that once bounced across stages began to slow. Some mornings his back stiffens, some nights pain lingers like an uninvited guest. "I live in my body like an old house," he told The Hollywood Reporter in 2019. "It creaks, but it's still standing." So he learned to live gently with it. Yoga at dawn, painting at noon, meditation at dusk. A walk through his Maui garden, the ocean wind against his face. Not to fight the years, but to thank them. "Pain visits," he says now, "but it's not cruel. It reminds me I'm alive." On difficult mornings, he steadies his hands and paints through the tremor. Each line is slower, but somehow more deliberate. An act of quiet victory. The laughter that once filled theaters now hums through the soft rhythm of his brush. And in that stillness, he has found something worth sharing. Not the wild comedy of youth, but the steady faith of survival. "Pain doesn't mean you're broken," he once told a friend. "It means you're still alive enough to feel." To the world, he may look older, the silver hair, the slower step. But to those who truly see him, he is luminous. His wrinkles are not decay. They are the map of every storm he outlasted. For those who battle their own bodies, who wake each day in pain, but rise anyway, his story is a reminder that endurance is its own kind of art. And sometimes, in the golden hush of his Brentwood studio, he catches his reflection in the glass. For a moment, he doesn't see the gray or the fatigue. Only the boy who once dreamed in the back of a van, still fighting, still shining. He lifts his brush, breathes deeply, and whispers, "Thank you." Then he paints the light. Because even now, at 63, Jim Carrey's greatest performance is not on film. It's in the simple, daily act of staying alive, choosing compassion over despair, and proving that beauty can still bloom from the ache. And perhaps the pain that lingers longest in Jim Carrey's heart isn't the kind born of fame or failure, but of love. The quiet, aching love between a father and the only child who once called him her hero. As the years have softened his laughter and slowed his step, that ache has only deepened, a reminder that even the brightest stars carry shadows. For decades, their bond drifted in and out of distance, stretched by fame, silence, and time, until life, in its quiet mercy, gave them a second chance. Jane Erin Carrey was born on September 6, 1987, a bright spark in a time when Jim's dreams were still fragile, when he was the young comedian performing in dimly lit clubs and driving home with pockets full of nothing but hope. He used to cradle her after long nights, her tiny fingers curling around his thumb as he whispered promises only a young father can make. "One day," he murmured, "you'll never have to worry again." And he kept that promise. But success came at a price he never foresaw. As the lights of Hollywood grew brighter, the space between father and daughter grew wider. His marriage to Melissa Wimmer, once built on shared dreams and struggle, dissolved under the pressure of fame, and the laughter that had once filled their small apartment became echoes across time. Jane stayed mostly with her mother, while Jim's life blurred into a carousel of movie sets, red carpets, and hotel rooms that never felt like home. "I was the man everyone wanted to see," he later admitted, "except the one person who needed me most." But dreams, once they come true, often steal what matters most. Years passed. Jane grew up watching her father on the big screen, the man who made the world laugh, but seemed unreachable. She became a singer, quietly carving her own path without leaning on his name, and in 2012 she appeared on American Idol. "I wanted to earn it myself," she said, her voice steady but proud. Jim watched from afar, tears glimmering as she sang. "She's the strongest part of me," he told a friend. "She's everything I hope to be. Just quieter." When she was eliminated, he didn't call her as a star giving advice. He called her as a father, whispering, "You were beautiful. You were brave. That's all that matters." That night, he painted, not a face or a landscape, but a simple heart surrounded by light. He later said it was the first painting he made with peace in his chest. As the years weathered him, life offered one of its rare mercies: reunion. After the storms of loss and solitude, Jane returned to his world, not as a little girl seeking comfort, but as a woman extending forgiveness. "We don't talk about the years we missed," she once said softly. "We just try not to miss the ones we have left." Now, a mother herself, Jane gave Jim something he never thought he'd earn again: a second chance at love without performance. When he holds his grandson, he does it, slowly, reverently, as if cradling time itself. "He laughs like I used to," Jim said, smiling with tears in his eyes. Visitors say his studio is lined with paintings of faces and light, but in one corner sits a single framed photo: Jane, holding her son beneath a morning sunbeam. "That," Jim once whispered, "is my masterpiece." In the end, it wasn't Hollywood that healed Jim Carrey. It was fatherhood. The applause faded, the cameras dimmed, and what remained was the sound of a child's laughter echoing through the corridors of memory. "My daughter taught me that love doesn't need to perform," he told Esquire. "It just needs to be present." And now, in the gentle twilight of his fame, that's all he seeks: presence. No scripts, no roles, no audience. Just the quiet grace of being called Dad, and the peace of knowing that even after the storms, the silence, and the pain, love, real, patient, forgiving love, had found its way home again. Now, at 63, with an estimated net worth of over $180 million, Jim Carrey lives in a quiet world he built with his own two hands. A world of peace, solitude, and creation. The man who once slept in a van behind a factory now wakes each morning in sunlight, streaming through tall glass windows, the breeze whispering through the trees that surround his Brentwood estate. He lives alone now, by choice, not by circumstance. With no entourage, no staff buzzing about, just a housekeeper who comes twice a week, and a gardener who tends the lawns he rarely walks across. His laughter, once echoed across global box offices, now fills the stillness of this $28 million mansion like a melody of gratitude. He bought the property in 1994 for just under $4 million, back when Dumb and Dumber had made him a household name. Over 3 decades, it evolved with him. 8 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms, and a private art studio that glows with sunlight by day and lamplight by night. Beyond the tennis courts, hidden behind tall hedges, lies a wide, mosaic-tiled swimming pool that catches the golden shimmer of California's afternoons. Inside, every wall tells a story, one lined with awards and film posters, another covered entirely in his own paintings. Faces half-lit by hope, abstract spirals of joy and grief. His favorite room, though, is the sunroom, where a grand piano sits beside an easel. "It's my church," he once said softly. "This is where silence teaches me to speak." His home feels alive, a living autobiography written in color and memory. In the corner of his studio rests the silver saxophone that once belonged to his father, polished but never played, standing beside a fading photograph of his mother. The two are the guardians of his peace. In the garage, next to a Porsche Panamera, rests an old, dusty motorcycle. His first big purchase after his earliest gigs in Toronto. "I keep it to remind me of the noise that got me here," he said. The rest of his car collection glimmers under soft light. A Mercedes-AMG GT, a Tesla Model S, and a vintage Jaguar XK120 from the 1950s, restored to perfection. "Speed used to thrill me," he admitted. "Now peace does. When the pace of Los Angeles feels too loud, he escapes to his $11 million Maui retreat, a seaside home surrounded by palms and ocean spray. Locals say they sometimes see him sitting on the porch, barefoot, sketchbook in hand, as the Pacific hums in the distance. The cottage is small, by Hollywood standards, but sacred. The walls are filled with sea-colored paintings, the floors with sand carried in from his walks. He keeps no TV there, only music and meditation. He calls it the only place where my mind forgets its famous. His fortune, once a symbol of victory, has long since become a tool for good. Over the years, he has quietly donated millions of dollars to children's hospitals, mental health research, and environmental protection causes. He's funded art programs for underprivileged youth and supported suicide prevention charities, though he rarely speaks of it. "If you give and need to be seen giving," he once said, "you're just buying applause." In private, he paints portraits to auction for charity, never signing them, never claiming them as his own. For a man once consumed by the world's gaze, anonymity has become his final freedom. And perhaps the greatest measure of Jim Carrey's success is not what he owns, but what he has outgrown. Fame, fortune, applause, all of it once defined him, then nearly destroyed him. But what remains, at 63, is the rarest form of wealth: peace. The kind that comes when a man no longer performs for love, but becomes love itself. In a world obsessed with noise, Jim Carrey has chosen silence. In an industry addicted to youth, he has chosen wisdom. He has learned that art is not about perfection, it's about truth. Every line on his face, every gray strand of hair, every scar from the stunts he refused to fake, is a line of poetry written by life itself. He is a living testament that greatness isn't measured by what you achieve, but by what you survive, and what you choose to become after the storm. Once, he was the rubber-faced jester of Hollywood, a man who could twist pain into laughter so convincing that even he forgot it hurt. But today, he stands as something deeper, a philosopher with a paintbrush, a soul who dared to walk through fame and come out human. His influence goes far beyond the screen. For decades, he taught us how to laugh. Now he teaches us how to heal. Through his art, his humility, and his quiet defiance of ego, Jim Carrey has become a mirror for everyone who has ever lost themselves trying to be loved, and found redemption in simply being real. He no longer courts the spotlight, yet the light finds him anyway. Universities quote his speeches on purpose and self-worth. His words, "You can fail at what you don't want, so you might as well take a chance on what you love," have become gospel to dreamers who once doubted their worth. He has turned his life into a masterclass in resilience, proving that pain can be fuel, that laughter can be medicine, and that love, no matter how fragile, can still rebuild what life breaks. There is a quiet nobility in the way he moves through the world now. He doesn't preach, he doesn't boast. He simply exists, fully, gratefully. His days unfold like prayer, a brush stroke, a walk, a breath. He knows that immortality is not about statues or fame, but the way your kindness echoes after you're gone. "If I leave anything behind," he once said, "let it be light, the kind people can find in their own darkness." So let us honor him, not just the actor, but the man, the son who rose from poverty, the father who learned to forgive, the artist who turned pain into color, and the soul who chose peace over applause. Jim Carrey's story is not just a Hollywood biography. It is a hymn to endurance, a reminder that no matter how many times life knocks us down, the miracle is not that we rise, but that we still dare to shine. And if his journey has touched something inside you, if you've ever found laughter in your loneliness or courage in your quiet moments, then take this moment to celebrate him. Leave a like, share his story, and let his legacy remind you, you are never too broken to begin again. From our hearts to yours, may your days be filled with health, peace, love, and laughter. May your life, like his, be proof that even after the darkest night, the human spirit still finds a way to paint the dawn.